The next session is by Megan Byrd-Sanicki, and it's on women in open source. Just a brief introduction for Megan. Megan is the manager, research and operations for Google Open Source Program Office. With a decade of experience stewarding and advising open source projects and communities, Megan champions open source citizenship and sustainability within Google and the industry at large. And in the past, she has been, the director of Drupal Association. And yeah, she's been involved in the Drupal community for a very long time as well. So over to you, Megan, and it's really nice to see you.
Thank you. I am so honored to be here. Before I get going, I just system check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Megan.
Yes,
great. All right. And can you see my, let's see, you can see my screen, yeah?
Yes.
All right. I need to do something because it's not sharing quite right. Every time I go to another, if I share this, do you see my speaker notes?
That's actually just the only thing that we see right now.
Okay, let's try this again. Is there a way for me to share?
I'm assuming you have a dual monitor setup.
I don't.
Oh, okay.
Well, I do. Yeah, I have two monitors, but it's on one.
All right. So you can select which monitor that you want to cast, and that particular one can have the slides on it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's not letting me do the present view. Every system is so different for every conference, so I apologize. It always takes me just a minute to figure out how to do this for you all. So if I do this, are you seeing my speaker notes?
Yep.
Or just the slide?
The speaker notes.
Huh. Okay, I guess Zoom doesn't work quite this way. Well, this will be interesting. Okay, let me pull it back up.
Yeah, I have faced similar problems. So I would simply drag the windows to the other desktop.
And then it might be toggling a little bit, but I think this could work. I don't know. All right, we will just make it work. All right. So you see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, so if you
Great. Okay, well, now I'm here. Sorry, I work at Google. I don't know how to get Google Slides to work with Zoom for some reason. So anyhow, let me just start by saying how absolutely honored I am to be here. And it's so great to see familiar faces. I have really missed Drupal, and especially the Drupal community. So I just want to first start by saying that I am here with good news, that the future is bright in open source, and especially for women in open source. And so today I just want to talk a little bit about my journey and the different careers I've had in open source and the women I've met along the way who have supported me. And I'd like to talk about why the future is bright in open source and how it helps us with some of the challenges that women have in tech in general, and what we can be doing, pro tips that we can take away to help us counteract some of those challenges. And also some pro tips for allies for women too. So that is what I'll cover today. And does that sound good to everyone? I'm hoping so, because that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do without speaker notes. So let me see. There we go. So why don't I start first by sharing my journey in open source. It isn't really something I am totally comfortable doing because I'm not one to always talk about myself. It's usually about the team and what the group did. Very much an open source value. But I wanted to share my journey so that I could help people see that open source has many paths, and open source has room for everybody, especially women. And what I wanted to highlight about my journey is that my path let me share a lot of skills and talents that are not about code, right? Everyone always thinks about open source and code and the developer experience. But I want to highlight that that is not the only path, and that open source needs a lot of skills. It needs diversity on all fronts. And I also want to just talk about my journey to highlight some career options that you may want to consider. Things that I've even learned recently that I did not know was even a path or an option. So let me just kind of dive in a little bit to my journey then. And it really started in tech. Right after college, I went and worked for a small software company as proprietary, but I started there doing marketing and sales, kind of just learning the business of selling software and understanding how customers have certain needs and how to understand those needs and how to give, through the sales process, bring those needs back to developers and development so that they can really have more of a customer-centric developer approach. Ended up working in marketing, sales, business development for several years, mostly working in proprietary software, but also I was working with some technology that was built in open source. But because I was on the sales and marketing side, it was early days for open source. The customers didn't really care. They just wanted to get their problems solved. And so I knew that my team and the product was built on Java. I knew my team was contributing to the J2EE specification. It meant nothing to me. I was just really like, yeah, sure, we have this, and this is why this is good for you, Mr. or Mrs. Customer. And I was able to just focus on the customer need and solving it with the different products that I had. And it was a really great to be able to work at small companies, startups, companies that went public during the dot-com, working for HP and understanding how enterprises work. So I had a lot of different experiences there. But then ultimately I decided to take a break from tech for a couple different reasons, and I decided to be a public servant. And I worked in government. I worked for the state of New Jersey here in the US, and at the time they wanted to find new funding models for how they fund the promotion and communications of public transit in the state of New Jersey. And so I came in kind of as a business consultant, really, and I took over their marketing and communications department. And together we did come up with a new funding model, so we weren't relying on tax dollars. We were getting less and less every year. And through this process, I ended up having to get into the trenches with the team and figuring out our operation model and how are we going to get out to communities in really smart ways, and how are we going to be more diverse, because New Jersey is a very diverse state, and needed to have multilingual campaigns and be more grassroots and meet people where they're at. And that is where I started working with communities. And I just really fell in love with that. That just really understanding different groups, understanding how to engage with them and how to understand their needs, how to meet them, how to listen to communities through public hearings. There's nothing like being in a room with hundreds of people and telling them that we're going to increase fares and having to listen to all of their concerns and anger and frustration. But listening with the intent of that one person in the room who has thought about this and has a suggestion that made our fare increase better and more fair for that community. And this whole process of learning and listening and understanding and wanting to help and wanting to serve really inspired me. And it was something I wanted to do, but I really missed technology. And I kind of searched around and asked my network, I'm like, how do I bring these together? And the answer was open source. You need to get into open source. You need to get into a foundation or work specifically for a project. And that's where I found the Drupal Association and this wonderful group of women that I worked with, among many other women in the community and lots of great people. And when I joined in 2010, it was a volunteer organization. There was no staff. I was the first staff person that they hired. And I just said, what do you need? What can I do? Here's what I can do. How can you use me? I really want to get involved. I really want to learn open source. And it was really one of the best changes I ever made in my life, especially career-wise, but also personally. And at that time, I shared my skills and talents of sales and got into fundraising. And I started selling sponsorships at DrupalCon, and then started to talk with more of the different stakeholders out there and where could we create value, but also generate income. So we started to create membership programs and doing more events. And also creating space on Drupal.org where we could highlight case studies. Started to create these different packages and working on business development. And it was at that time where I was doing more and more on the fundraising front that we started to expand what we were doing, including DrupalCon. And this was a life changer for me. I am most proud of the fact that we expanded DrupalCon into India, and we held DrupalCon Asia in 2016. It made complete sense. If you look at the stats year over year, India is the #2 contributing country, and not by a small amount. There's a lot of amazing contributions coming from India, and that's the case in 2016 and continues today. Of course, we had to go to India. We needed to bridge that gap because not everyone in India can go to the US, or not everyone can go to Europe for these DrupalCons. And there was so much talent to harness and bring together and unite and really help strengthen this community and grow it. And through this experience, I got to go to India twice. The first time was in 2015, where we needed to do site visits and figure out where are we going to hold this. And that's where I really got to know the Drupal India community. We went to Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, and each place the community just rolled out the red carpet. They showed us what was so amazing about their city, what was so special about their community, how their community was so committed to making this happen, and what they would do to contribute to this and work with the Drupal Association. I learned so much about the passion of this community that and was just mentioned by different people in your last segment. And it's true, the passion in India is by far off the hook. Also, one of your, I think, strategic advantages, to tap into that is amazing, and it moves mountains. And it did move mountains because we ended up picking Mumbai for DrupalCon Asia. And we had to work really closely with the community because we knew, especially coming from the US, we didn't understand how events were run in India. And we could not get into the IIT Bombay without sponsors from India to get us in. Also, the agendas and the time frames for when conferences run in India had to be different and catered to really what the community needed there. And so there was great collaboration. We had meetings at all hours and many, many meetings. And this was being done by the community on top of their full-time jobs. And it was amazing. And I think it just really highlights what is so special about India. And it also gave us a view into how India can teach the rest of the world how to do open source, how to be a community, how to be a passionate community, how to be an inclusive community. I saw lots of women especially step forward and help pull this event together and be highlighted at the event. Here's just a picture of some of the women I got to work with. And that was just a really incredible time and something I'm very proud of. And then I moved into the COO role at the Drupal Association, where it helped us scale a lot of our services so that we could go beyond just serving DrupalCon India, we started looking at growing our staff and seeing what more we could do around the world. And then ultimately, I became the executive director of the Drupal Association and learned all kinds of new skills and met lots of new people, including Shyamala. And this is where I learned all about board management and how that's an important role in open source, especially if you have a foundation. Setting a strategic direction for a project in staff is a real special skill set that I got to learn. And I got to learn from people like Shyamala because she's such an amazing leader. And I'll talk a little bit more about this, but I just cannot thank Shyamala enough for all of the support she gave me as I was learning how to be an executive director, and the different things that we did together were really amazing. So I will touch more on that. But being an executive director is definitely a special role that you can have in open source. And my open source journey was just starting in Drupal, and I spent 8 years going very, very deep in understanding how to run a project. And I have to say, Drupal is leading on many, many fronts because they're 19 years old, and this community had to figure out a lot of things on their own, and before other projects were even at the stage that they're in. And so I learned a lot from Drupal. I can definitely say now that I'm out of Drupal and working broadly across open source, I see Drupal very much as a leader on many fronts. Drupal led me to expanding my network beyond just Drupal. And one of the people I met was Sarah Novotny, who at the time was working in Google Cloud as an open source strategist. And one of her roles was to take over the Kubernetes community. And she was one of the driving forces for Google Cloud to decide to open source Kubernetes and give it to the Linux Foundation, so that it wasn't just Google-led, it was community-led and managed out of a neutral place in the Linux Foundation. And that was a massive business strategy that she led. Google Cloud was really focused on becoming a real player in the cloud wars, as they call them. And they were pretty far behind in the number 3 position. And Sarah saw an opportunity to get Kubernetes more broadly adopted because, it's a container orchestration system. And it was not as well used as it could be. It wasn't as well adopted as it could be, primarily because it was kind of under the Google umbrella. It wasn't as well known. Some people weren't sure if they wanted to contribute to a corporate-focused, a corporate-owned project. And she said, if we move this to a community-driven project, kind of like how Drupal is, we will grow the community. More people will want to contribute to this. More people will want to adopt it. And because of the kind of technology it is, it will be a game changer for cloud. It will get people to suddenly think, well, I'm using AWS, I'm using Azure, but now because of Kubernetes, I can use any cloud I want, including Google Cloud. And so she came up with this strategy to move it to a foundation and make this a community-driven project instead of a corporate-driven project. And then she led that effort and got many, many people on board to make that happen. It took a lot of influence and convincing and a lot of strategy to set this up so that the strategy worked. And ultimately, Kubernetes has been a massive industry disruptor. Its adoption has grown tremendously. It is just used everywhere. And because of that, it really helped Google Cloud leapfrog in its own adoption. And so we really closed the gap in terms of our position with AWS and Azure. And I just think she's an amazing person that I highly recommend that you follow and get to know. She's now at Microsoft as an executive, helping them with their open source strategy. And as you know, open source is a very important strategy for Microsoft right now. So through my networking with her I ended up finding out about an opportunity to work with her. And she brought me into Google to help start shaping what this open source strategy team would look like and how we could have broader impact across Google. And I'll talk a little bit more about the importance of networking. But as my career goes, now I am working in Google Open Source Programs Office. And we brought the open source strategy team that Sarah had created and that I took over. We brought it into this team because this is where all of open source at Google is supported. We wanted all of the services to come together so that they could be integrated, and anyone in Google, wherever they were in their journey of using open source, could easily tap into these services that were integrated, get the help that they need, and make the impact that they want to make. And I wanted to kind of pause here to explain what a open source programs office is, at least from the perspective of Google. Because I had been working in Drupal for so long, that I got to really know Drupal. And I got to understand all the work it takes to contribute to a project and all the careers you can have because of that. And of course, I knew that people were adopting Drupal and that people were adopting open source, but I didn't really understand all of the opportunities on the consumer side. And one of them that's been a real eye-opener for me has been going into an open source programs office, because it opens up tons of careers that I want to highlight, so that as you're thinking about your path in open source, you think more broadly than I did a couple of years ago. And so an open source programs office, also called OSPO for short, is something that you find in enterprises. It used to be that enterprises would consume open source, and then over time, they started to contribute back to open source, and then they started to even think about creating and releasing their own open source. And at the beginning, it was, kind of like small potatoes, as they say here in the US. And it was pretty easy to manage, and they were experimenting. But then over time, all of this use and release of open source in the enterprise became really complex and really grew at scale. And that is a lot of it's because of digital transformation. A lot of it's because of the move to the cloud, and cloud is predominantly open source. It's a lot of it's because of moving to new, I guess you would call it workflows like DevOps, and using tools like Jenkins. And suddenly you have a company like Google that has just a massive amount of open source usage. Google really followed this story. Like, we started with using Linux, we started to release patches back, and then we started to create our own open source. And today we do this at scale. We use hundreds of millions of lines of open source code, and we release just as many. And in any given year, we're pushing over 250,000 commits. And we've released over 280,000 open source projects. Like, that's how many we're using today. There are some that we've deprecated, but this is what's active. And so it's a gigantic amount. And it really has led to some amazing projects that I'm sure you know and use, from Android and Chromium, TensorFlow, Go, which, by the way, I see a lot of people going from Drupal into Go. And then I talked about Kubernetes. And all of this opens up a lot of risk to a company. When you have this many people consuming and releasing open source, there's legal and compliance risk. So do we know what kind of licenses that we have to adhere to when we pull in open source? Do we know which license to use to protect Google when we release it? And when we have a project like Android or Angular or Go, we have reputational risk. Like, these projects require communities. Or if we're contributing to a project like Linux, like or Apache, there's already communities there. And we have to know how to either steward these communities well, or we have to know how to engage in these communities in the way that is appropriate to those community norms. And, you know, Google has its own way of doing open source. It's not necessarily an open source way. And when we don't do this well, we create reputational risk. And so we need people to go in and help Googlers learn how to contribute and steward the open source way, so we don't get this reputational risk. And then, of course, there's business risk. Do we know how to create an open source strategy that's going to help a business goal at Google, like Kubernetes and what Sarah did? And if you don't pick the right open source strategy, you're not going to achieve a business goal that you're hoping to achieve. And if you don't execute that strategy well, you're definitely not going to get those business goals met. So there's a lot of different risks in the enterprise associated to open source that frankly I just didn't know was a thing that you had to manage. And this is why open source programs offices were created. This is why Google's OSPA was created, and it's one of the first. It's about 12 to 15 years old. And now we have a whole series of services that we help mitigate those risks, and we help Googlers of all kinds deliver impact with open source. And we do that by sharing knowledge and consultation and providing support and tooling. And the kinds of things that we do is we help them strategize. We help product managers say, if you want to go this way with your product and these are your business goals, here are some open source strategies you may want to consider. And then we help them execute that. We help them create open source well and do it right. And we help them use open source. Which ones can you pull in? How do you do that the right way? And if you're going to contribute back, how do you do that the right way? We do have about 20% of our projects do form communities, and they need to be stewarded. They need to be stored sustainably. They need to be stewarded well. And so we have community managers and strategists who do that for projects, whether it's Android or Chromium or Kubernetes or TensorFlow or Go. These are the kinds of projects that we get involved in. And then, of course, we help these projects grow and stay sustainable with all kinds of programs, whether it's different events and meetups to help projects come together and grow, or it's helping them stay sustainable with programs like Google Summer of Code, which Drupal gets involved in every year. And so these are different things that we do in our programs office, and it opens up all kinds of careers. We have engineers who build tools to make sure that we accelerate velocity for Googlers, and we help them reduce that compliance risk. We have lawyers and compliance experts that help create the policies that everyone has to follow. So we reduce that risk and take out the mystery for people. When we are stewarding projects or creating projects, using projects, we have strategists that help make sure we really think this through. We have community managers embedded in all of these projects that I mentioned to make sure that it's a welcoming project, that we are growing the community in a diverse way, that we are growing it in the way with a vendor ecosystem so it's really well supported and sustainable. We have program managers. That's a whole career path here. So the people that run Google Summer of Code are program managers. We also have program managers working on Season of Docs and peer bonus programs, which Drupal has been awarded this year. And then you have my team, which is strategy, research, and operations. So we think about what do all of these Googlers, we have over 100,000 Googlers, so many of them using open source. What does OSPO need to do to keep evolving and meeting those needs? And how do we create the different services so that they are really helping Google get the full value of open source? What does the industry need so that we can be great citizens and make sure we're contributing back in ways that is the most impactful and helpful for the projects we use and the projects we don't use but we're dependent on? And so that's what my team does. We do all of that strategy research. We provide research so that everyone can make data-driven decisions to make sure that they are creating the best services they possibly can to support Google in the industry. And then, of course, we have operations. This whole department needs to have budget management, and we set our OKRs and things like that. We need someone to help us make sure we do that consistently and efficiently and effectively and all those operational words. And so that's what my team does. This opened my eyes up to a whole new world of careers that you can have in open source on the consumer side. So you probably know how you might play a role in working at agencies, like Drupal agencies, and you might think about how you could work at consulting practices like Tata, but getting involved in OSPOs is a whole nother path because they're in enterprises and they're global. And I think that you might start seeing more of these opportunities even in India, because as enterprises consume open source more and more, you're starting to see these OSPOs get adopted in many enterprises. And here are just a few of them. These are all members of the Linux Foundation's OSPO group called the To-Do Group. And you can go see these at todogroup.org. And they're hiring all over. And so you might start seeing these career opportunities there in India. So I definitely encourage you to check this out. So yeah, that was just a little sidebar about, like, this blew my mind. I hope it blows your mind. Check it out. But that's not quite the end of my journey. I am in that part of my journey, but being at Google, leveraging my my knowledge from working in the Drupal Association gave me the opportunity to work at, be a board member at the Open Source Initiative. So I was recently voted into this organization, which I just like to highlight because, you know, Drupal is an affiliate member of the Open Source Initiative, but I don't know if I fully understood its role in open source. So I want to highlight this. In short, the Open Source Initiative is the absolute decider on what the open source definition is. And it determines what an open source license is. Like, at the end of the day, when you take everything away, technology is open source because of the license you choose. And there's only a group of licenses that make something open source. And this is the group that looks at all the different kinds of licenses that are being proposed out there. And this is the only group that can decide if something is truly open source. And so it has a huge impact on the entire industry. So I really wanted to help make it more resilient as open source is changing. There's more players, there's more pressures to evolve the name of open source, and it needs to be done well and strategically and thought through. Drupal and the way that the Drupal Association board has evolved over the years gave me a lot of experience of how to evolve a board and how to make it a strategic board. And so these are the kinds of ways that I would like to help open source initiative. And because of that, and because of my work at Drupal, and because I could demonstrate and point to the things that we did as a community, I was elected. So I couldn't have done that without Drupal. And so that's a part of my journey that I'm excited to see where that goes. And I feel that it's going to help me make an impact in open source at scale. And because of my work, especially in Drupal, I just recently received Red Hat's Women in Open Source Award, which I am really proud of. And it's been really validating to me because it means that all of this quote unquote non-code contribution I've been doing over the years mattered and is recognized and validated and valued. And that means a lot to me. And I'd like to highlight that because if you are someone who is going down a different path than just code for an open source project, just know that, like, it is needed. I know it's needed. I've been paid because it's needed, but also the industry is recognizing it. And so I really encourage you to explore all these different paths in open source. I also want to point out that I was not the only winner. There was an academic winner named Neda Hussain, and she is from India. She is a neuroscientist, and she was recognized for her work that she's doing right now at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden but also because of her work with Wikipedia. And she was a real driver in building community in India, especially running special events for women and the LGBTQ community right there in India. And so that was a real honor, and it's nice to know that I was in such good company. And so that's where I am in my journey. And I have been able to have all kinds of experiences because of it. And hopefully that gives you some ideas of what you might want to do with your career in open source. But I stand on the shoulder of giants. I absolutely could not have gotten through this journey without the help of others. And I just want to highlight some women in open source that really made a difference, whether they supported me or they inspired me. So I first want to call out Shamala Rajaram once again. She is a true leader. And I am absolutely inspired in how she balances running a company, being involved in a community, working on the board and contributing that way, working in her own personal community, managing the work-life balance really well. And she was a huge mentor for me, helping me understand how to lead a board, how to lead staff. And she got in the trenches, and she was a huge helper. She didn't just mentor, but she rolled up her sleeves, and we did great work together. She is a role model for women, and I really hope that you all see her as a role model. I hope that you get the chance to learn from her and highlight her as well in your own community, which I know you do. And I heard it before from Shimpi and Piyush and Parth mentioned her as a mentor. I just can't say enough about Shamala, so thank you. Another person who was just a great mentor and taught me open source was Angie Byron, who I think is a great role model and leader in Drupal. Denise Cooper has been in open source for a very long time. She created one of the first OSPOs at Sun Microsystems, did amazing work with open projects, open docs, I forget, and now it's called LibreOffice, Open Office. Now it's called LibreOffice. And yeah, Denise was on the board, and she brought us a lot of insight on the industry and other foundations, and she's been a mentor to me along the way. Deb Bryant also has been in the industry for a very long time, has really made an impact in open source, and now runs the Open Source Programs Office for Red Hat. And she's on the board of OSI and contributes in lots of many ways. I highly recommend you follow her. Let's see, Nitya Ruff is someone I've met recently. She runs the Open Source Programs Office for Comcast, a large national telecom industry company here in the US. And she is out leading in this industry and showing this industry how to use open source and showing Comcast how to do it well. I highly recommend you follow her on Twitter and get to know her. Stormy Peters is another person that inspires me. She has been contributing to open source for years and runs the Open Source Programs Office at Microsoft now. So that is, I don't know, follow what she's doing. She's building a pretty amazing team over there right now. Also, Kat Allman, I have known. She works at Google. She is one of the creators and managers of GSOC, Google Summer of Code. She ran many of the sustainability programs at Google for many years and has had a huge influence of how open source is done at Google, and also making sure that Google is a great citizen for the projects that we work in the industry at large. And then VM Brosor literally wrote the book on open source. So I highly recommend you check out her book. She runs OSPOs as well. Recently was at Juniper Networks, and I think is exploring other opportunities now, but I've kind of lost track. Anyhow, these are just some women that I highly recommend that you get to know as well and follow them. And, as you consider your path, and like I said, there are many paths, there are just some things that we as women need to be cognizant of. We have some headwinds. There's several, but these are 4 that I just wanted to call out. One is our work-life balance. We do have a lot of expectations on us and responsibilities. We have different family requirements that we have to meet. It's just built into our social systems, our family systems. And it's also something we want to do. Like when we have children, we want to actually be in their lives. And we're trying to balance work, and work can be very demanding as well. And in the workplace, there's also bias. And it's something that I know that a lot of companies are working on. Unconscious bias is just a thing. And there's actually been studies. Harvard Business Review did a study with the Rockefeller Foundation, and women CEOs get into their positions 4 years later in life than men. And that's because they have to prove themselves more than men before they get that opportunity. They have to go through the paces just a little bit more before people feel that they're actually ready for these leadership roles. And then there is something, well, I'll skip to the less opportunity. There can just be less opportunities, sometimes because of that bias. Perhaps less education opportunities are offered to us, or our managers are not offering us as much professional training as they might give to others. And maybe that's because they think that we don't have as much time, and so they don't want to give us, be stressed, or they don't want to give us those stretch opportunities for us to grow because they see how much maybe we're balancing. And there's just, there is just that headwind. And then the last one I want to call is something called the glass cliff, which is actually worse than the glass ceiling. The glass cliff is something that happens especially mid-career for women. Women, when they are given opportunities, are given opportunities where they have to save something. Maybe it's an account that's going to fail, or maybe it's an organization that's going under. And they're like, well, we think you can do this. And women tend to really step into these roles. They really want to save something. There's just a lot in the research from Harvard Business Review and the Rockefeller Center that is just certain attributes that make us lean in and go and try to save that. But it's so hard that in the end, whether we were successful or not, we can burn out because it was so hard. Or it fails and people judge us for failing at something that was never going to be successful. And at that point, we either walk away because we're just like, this is too hard, or we don't get another opportunity because women don't get the opportunity to fail forward as much as men. And so this is something that it happens. I definitely have seen all of these in my own career, but I will say it doesn't stop me, and it doesn't need to stop you either. It's just something to be aware of. But in addition to those headwinds, there are things that we do to ourselves that hold ourselves back that we need to be aware of. One is just our imposter syndrome. We just really don't own our awesome, and we second guess ourselves. So when there's a job application, a job posting, the research shows that women won't apply unless they think they qualify for 100% of the items listed in the job description, whereas men will apply when they feel they qualify for at least 60%. Well, you know what? We do not need to hold ourselves back. Why do we think we need to do everything on that job description? Why do we think that job description is a holy grail that is actually everything? Sometimes people put things in job descriptions that are, aspirational. We need to just open all the doors for ourselves and let them decide if our application is strong enough or not. We don't need to hold ourselves back. We also don't self-promote as much. So men are more likely to tell the world what they did and go up to their boss and say, I'd like a promotion. Here's why. We just don't do that. We tend to wait for people to come to us to give us promotions. And when we do talk about success, we talk about success in a relational standpoint, which is very common for women, instead of talking about what I specifically did. And we also don't dream big enough for ourselves. A lot of times we just don't have enough role models out there for us to realize or see ourselves in a situation. We don't have a big enough network to see all the different paths that we can have out there, which is one of the reasons I wanted to share the different things I've done, so that it might turn on some light bulbs. And we also tend to hold ourselves back because we fear how other people are going to react to us. Maybe we want to be more assertive in a meeting, but we don't because we're afraid we're going to come off as aggressive. Or we may not want to get angry at something that someone did because that gets labeled as crazy. Other things that we might fear is being ambitious, because ambitious might be interpreted as something more negative than that. And so we hold ourselves back because we fear what other people might do. And honestly, that's not fair, because we're really not giving these people credit for how they actually might respond. And so, we need to think about how we're actually behaving in the moment and challenge ourselves a little bit more. And I have done all of these things. I have definitely been working on this myself. I have coaches. I always have a coach. And I have a group of women that we really talk about what we're doing, and we call each other on the things that we're doing to hold ourselves back. And that has been really helpful, to have a group of women to help me see myself, see where I'm holding myself back, and push me to go and be a little bit more assertive. And so, there's, like I said, these things are real. They don't need to stop us at all. We have choice, and choice is powerful. And one thing we can choose is being in open source, because I think it is a great environment for women to head off these headwinds. And specifically, what I mean by that is, open source as like an environment to work in gives us opportunities we may not get in other types of companies. So being in open source, it is by nature distributed, and there's more virtual companies because of this. And let's face it, with COVID, we're just all forced to work from home anyhow. So we'll see how the world looks anyhow. There might just be more opportunities. But when you get to work from home, you get to have more time to commit to that work-life balance. I did work at Google. I went to the San Francisco office. But because I work in the open source part, it was very easy for me to go to my boss and say, I have a situation. My parents were in a horrible car accident. They're not okay. I need to go home and take care of them. And they said, that is fine. We are open source. We understand how distributed working works. We're going to get you remote status. I now work from home. I take care of my parents who live down the street. And because of COVID, I have my in-laws living with me, and they're sheltering in place. So now I can take care of 2 sets of parents and do a full-time job. And a lot of it's because of open source and the flexibility to work from home. Also, open source is open. I did not need any certificates or special education to get an open source. I just had to say I want in. And then I found my way in. And so it really lowers the barrier. And so if you weren't given certain educational opportunities, or you don't have the money to go get certain certifications or that extra degree, that's okay. You can find your way in open source without extra education. A lot of the things I found with my growth was just doing what I can do, and then getting new skills by applying myself in new ways. Open source allows us to do it because they value that. I also think that open source is just on the rise. I see it with enterprises and how much open source is being used in enterprises. And that's just opening up new jobs, like these jobs in OSPOs. So that's just going to give more opportunity for you as you're looking to pursue careers in open source. And I think Drupal is a great project to be in. It has a lot of ingredients. One, right now, 8% of the contributions are coming from women. So it does mean there needs to be more work to be done in Drupal. And that's in open source overall. But I bet if I stack Drupal contributions and women in Drupal compared to other projects, you're probably ahead. And that's because these ingredients are in place. It is welcoming. It has values around inclusivity. It has a strong contributor experience that really cares about supporting all contributors. And it has strong diversity, equity, and inclusive programs, much more so than other projects that I have seen. And it's been doing this for quite some time. And so there's many, many other things that Drupal's doing right. So I do firmly believe that being in Drupal is a great place for women to start to thrive. And let's face it, Drupal's being adopted more and more by enterprises. And you're seeing, I think, that growth more in India. And when I look at who's contributing to Drupal, a lot of Indian companies are mentioned, from Srijan to QED42, hopefully I said that right, Tata, like a lot of great names are being mentioned. And so I think there's a good opportunity there. And I would also say that that is good because when I look at the statistics for how women are contributing to Drupal, there are more women contributing for sponsored work than volunteer work. And I think that's because we just have less time. So the fact that you have Indian companies doing well with Drupal business and contributing back probably means that when you work for them, you're going to have more of a chance to have a career in open source and be paid to do contributions on the job. I think these are important things and things you should look for if you're looking for a career in open source in India. So I think being in open source is great. It's not enough. You have to think about the things that we're doing to ourselves to hold ourselves back. And so I want to provide some pro tips. You want to set an intention. What kind of a career, what kind of role in open source do I want to have? And you need to say that because it's, like I said, there's so many. And so you need to be very clear about your skills and your talents and your passions and where you want to grow. Really think about it. Talk to people and pick an intention. Know that you can always choose that intention. But saying an intention is pretty strong. And so as Wayne Dwyer says, where your mind goes, your energy flows. And I have seen people, once they set that intention, say, this is what I want, things start to happen for them. And after you set that intention, ask for help. You can be surprised how much people want to help you get where you want to go. The way I won the Women in Open Source Award was by asking for help. I wanted that award. And I asked Dries for help, and Jacob Redding for help, and Ryan Zarama for help, and they wrote my nominations. And because of that, I won that award. It wasn't just that I sat back and waited for someone to notice me. I asked for help. And then network. Expand your horizons. Start networking. You need to invest in your network. And I highly recommend you invest in network outside of Drupal. Drupal does a great job of networking. We call it the Drupalverse. It can suck you in. There is a whole world out there of people to learn from and that are doing all kinds of different things in open source. The Linux Foundation has Open Source Summit at the end of June. I highly recommend you check it out and start networking beyond just Drupal. Although definitely go to DrupalCon coming up in July. Great place to network. I have to ask you to support that. But my network outside of Drupal is what got me my job at Google, as an example. And then you need to just go for it. If you want something, you see something interesting, but you start to feel that, well, it's not for me, you need to recognize those feelings. And you need to challenge yourself. You need to go for it. And if you need help going for it, if you start thinking or second guessing yourself, you need to reach out to people you trust and say, I want to do this, but I have these stories in my head why I shouldn't do this. Brene Brown talks about this all the time. get the stories out of your head. It's the stories in your head that hold you back. You need to validate them. You need to put them in the light, and you need to let other people look at these stories. They will tell you, yeah, you're right, you're not ready for that. Or they're going to say, go for it. That is not true. And the last thing is, what is the worst thing that can happen for if you go for something and you don't get it? Only you can open doors for yourself. The next one is toot your horn. This is hard. This was hard for me. I always talked about the team. But you know what? This is how you get ahead. I can't change how the world works, but it is important that you know how to articulate what you uniquely did and the impact you had. And if you don't have the language, you can think like a consultant. You just simply say, here was the problem, here's what I did, here's the impact. Boom, that's it. Put that on your resume, put that in your performance review, put that in your pitch when you go and ask for a promotion. It could feel awkward, but you really should do it, and you need to challenge yourself. And then last but not least, just own your awesome. And by this is like, first you have to know what your awesomeness is. I highly recommend things like Strength Finders. Look up Strength Finders. It's a simple test that you take, and it is a comprehensive report on where you are really strong. Because where you're strong is where you want to lean in, and you want to think about how you can use those strengths. And you also can do kind of like a 360-degree review of yourself. And you want to pick your peers, you want to pick people in your personal life, you want to pick bosses. Ask them to give you feedback on where you are strong, where they see you making an impact, where they think you might even grow. But really, honestly, focus on your strengths. And you would be surprised what you get. And you want to just sit with that. And you really want to own who you are and how special you are. It is something we don't do enough of, and it is a foundation that unlocks all these other opportunities for you. And lastly, I want to talk to the people in the room that don't identify as women. And we're asking you to be allies. And if you want to be an ally, here are some pro tips. The first one is set an intention for being an ally. This is something you have to commit to. You have to be aware that it's needed. It has to be something that you want to do. And you have to ask yourself, what does success look like for me if I choose to be an ally? And here are some ways to be an ally. First, talk to us. Ask us what it's like, what are our needs, what are our dreams. Ask us how you can support us, and listen. Really listen. And listen to understand. And then think about what we're asking for and ways that you can help. Maybe it's mentoring. Maybe it's amplifying. Maybe it's including them in projects that are give them some new skills and experiences. But really think about how you can support and do something. And then when you're in a meeting, look around the room and think about who's at the table. If it's just a bunch of men, you have work to do. And it'd be really helpful if you're a manager, thought about how to have diversity at the table. And if you're not a manager, how can you have that conversation to say, like, hey, we need to have more diversity at this table. And there's business reasons as well as it's just the right thing to do. And the business reasons, of course, is more perspectives makes better solutions. And when we are at the table or when we are engaging, help us be heard. Some women actually give their ideas to men and say, please share my idea, because I want to just make sure my idea is heard and considered. That is a real thing. And I know women that have had to do that because they haven't been heard, they've been talked over, or they've said something and they were ignored. Then honestly, a man said the same thing and people were like, that's a great idea. You know what? Like, be really aware of this dynamic. And if somebody says something and you don't think they were heard, stop it and say, oh, I think Sally had a great idea. Can you say that again, Sally? It's pretty simple, but it's amazing how that helps. Also, if you oh, I should probably flip these last two. You can amplify women's awesomeness too. It is sometimes hard for people to toot their horns. You can toot it for them. I really like it when my allies amplify that I'm speaking at a conference. It's something I'm really proud of, but sometimes I don't know how to really say, like, oh my gosh, like somebody wants me to talk and share my expertise. It feels really good when people amplify that. And also, if you see a situation that you know is not helpful, maybe it's toxic, or maybe it's just a small little microaggression, say no. You have power and privilege in ways you don't realize. Say no and stop things, and don't let bad behavior enter into an environment for women. So those are just some pro tips that I have for you, for allies, that I've seen work, that I know I greatly appreciate when I see them in action. And but I have to say that I am highly confident that you all have a great future in open source. And I know that because there's evidence. I have seen how women like Shamala are thriving and leading and mentoring. And I've seen other women step up in India, here in Drupal. And I am confident that these companies and the community that you formed have many, many allies. I've also seen evidence of this too. And so I know your future is bright. And I certainly hope that my stories have just given examples of different ways that you might pursue your path in open source, and giving you other women that might inspire you too, that you might want to follow. And I just want to say just thank you for this opportunity, both to share, but also just really connect with you. I've really valued this, so thank you. And I guess I'll open up to questions now.
Oh, okay. All right. Hey, thank you so much, Megan. We have one question from Ujjwal. They're asking, being a role model, any special message for a woman on a career break and looking to resume work in open source?
Yeah, so they're on a career break and they want to get back into open source.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a couple things. It's really what is it that they want, and what are they trying to achieve? So if they need a job, they're ready to get back in the workforce. They have many skills. They have many skills, both probably maybe from prior work experience, and also they should not forget all the skills that they are getting as being a parent, all the project management, all the people relations that they're managing. There's a lot of skills there. And so they can apply to different kinds of jobs. But if they're looking to contribute and start building up kind of like their contribution resume, then I would highly recommend that they start working with the Drupal mentors and the first-time contributor sprints if they are not contributing yet. But it's a great way to build up your resume to show the kinds of impact you're making and how you know and understand open source and how to contribute to a project, and how even that contribution might help from a customer perspective.
All right, thank you so much. So I actually, since, okay, there's one more question, but I don't know if I want to take this in the interest of time. Just give me 1 second, just so that I can read through and. Oh, okay. Well, I know this can be a discussion, so I would want to rather, move on to the next part of the event. I hope you don't mind, anonymous attendee, but feel free to share this question with Megan on Twitter. Is that fine? And start a discussion. I'm sure people attending this would also would want to join in.